to this one. We're live on Facebook as well. Nice. What a time to be alive. G'day.
Just working on, sorry, I'll ask later, forget about it.
But g'day everyone, welcome to another chat with Thalita Alves, official icon of whiskey brand ambassador Thalita Alves. We've had a couple of chats through the Scotch whisky portfolio that you look after in the recent weeks. And we are now, we've done a few, we're now on to Glenglassaugh, which we're going to talk about tonight and have a little bit of fun. But first and foremost, how are you?
I'm good. It's only
Good?
Tuesday, it's raining. It's quite cozy today, isn't it? The weather is actually nice, although it's raining. I'll tell you that I was about to go home.
Yeah.
But it's actually exciting to be here. This place has something quite comfortable about it, isn't it?
It is, and it's only actually the rain that's just sort of started in the last couple of minutes. Basically, when you brought whiskey in, it decided to start pouring down rain, which is how we like it. I'm just going to check keep my eye on these sort of things. I think before we go too much further down, and a g'day to everyone who's watching across both channels. Mikey Lowe tuning in. I think we know who Mikey is. Before I get too much further, we should probably give a bit of a shout out to our friends down in Melbourne, who have had a pretty shithouse day from a few different reasons. But hopefully they will get through this 6 weeks of re-lockdown quite soon.
Another 6 weeks, and we know that it can be a little bit challenging at times. That's of course, I think especially hospitality or whiskey people, our industry is very lighthearted. We're very supportive of one another, but we know that there are days that can be a little bit challenging. So I think we said that a few weeks ago. Please reach out if you need anything. Your friends, us, your enemies, your family, anybody. Just make sure that if you have the need to talk, don't keep it to yourself. Especially that's what it was.
Yeah. So I was like, why is it quite loud here?
These sounds okay.
Yeah.
Especially in times like this. I think staying at home 24/7 for 6 weeks. Regardless of how privileged some of us actually are, you're working, life's good, the fridge is full of food. We're still allowed to feel sad. We're still allowed to have our moments. So allow yourself to feel and share. Yeah,
and I think there's an element of, no one knows how this is going to go, but fingers crossed, touch wood, touch barrel. New South Wales looking okay at the moment. No second wave yet, but it could happen any day. And I think that's what sort of feeling for the people in Melbourne is getting out of it, thinking, okay, we did the hard work, let's start rebuilding, and then get a couple of weeks in and then go back. So
we're talking about today. Imagine you're in a venue, you just bought produce, you just ordered things in, you maybe just hired new people, you just got people engaged, you just cleaned the whole, you're ready to start. And then had to close again.
Yeah, pretty nightmare. A quick wave to Kirst on the Instagram as well. What I can say though is because my now trip to Melbourne, which was going to be, I should have been there around about now. Obviously, it was going to be later in the year. It's probably going to be next year now. But my trip to Melbourne back, whenever it is, it's going to be big. It's going to be big. I don't know when it happened, but it's going to be big. But as Stephen points out on Facebook, yes, if you're in Sydney right now, it is whiskey weather. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Very whiskey.
A bit of rain, comfortable. It's not too cold as well. It's actually quite cozy. Nice.
Yeah. A quick g'day to Beck as well from Mudgee on the Instagram, from the Baker Williams Distillery, tuning in. Hopefully they've got some rain out there. Rain in the city is good, but it just waters pavement and concrete and asphalt. But some rain out west would be good. Because remember when the drought was our biggest concern in a pre-COVID, pre-bushfire as well?
It's coming again.
What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive.
Okay, so let's talk about good things for a little bit.
Let's talk about whiskey, yes. So we've done a few events with Glenglassaugh over the years. It's a distillery that I think some people are aware of, but if you're quite in tune with whiskey, you're aware of the distillery. You may not have too much of an opinion on it, but it's something you're aware of. And I think if you are just getting into whiskey, it's a distillery that may not be on the radar.
At all, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say that out of our three scotches, it's the least known, right? And it's a very, very, very fair statement. We have a bottle over here. So Glenglassaugh, although it's not that well known, still quite old distillery. We're talking about 1875. But the thing is, as we always joke about having Glenglassaugh having 9 lives.
Yeah.
This distillery opened and closed a bunch of times, and and remained closed for a fair number of years, like just a bit more than 60 years. So I think it's fair that people might not be aware of it. But the character of the whiskey definitely has a lot to do with its history. So somehow I think nowadays it's fair to be almost grateful to the way Glenglassaugh was brought to life.
Yeah, it's almost a distillery that was ahead of its time in a few aspects.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you're talking about Glenglassaugh to someone, say I've never heard of the distillery before, how do you introduce Glenglassaugh? I mean, it's not the easiest distillery to pronounce either, or word to say, and there's a lot of glens in Scotland, so it can often.
But it has nothing to do with any other glen, isn't
Yeah.
it? Like you can think about any other distillery, any other glen distillery. It's very Glenglassaugh has although it's hard to describe, I think it's very characteristic. So number one, it's on the coast. It's a glen that is a coastal, and that alone, it's pretty special. On top of it, we have such a unique new make spirit, which actually made us close for the spirit of 60 years. Imagine they were trying to, not us, of course, the previous owners, they were trying to distill whiskey for blends, and they failed again and again for a bit more than 2 decades, and got to a point that they just gave up and closed again.
Yeah.
So
that's an interesting point. I mean, they're making a whiskey in the 60s and the 70s for blends.
80s,
but
it was like 60s, 70s,
Yeah.
and 80s, like almost 3 decades trying to produce whiskey for blends
And
and,
it had
failing.
too much flavour, too much character. If single malts had been a big thing in the 60s and 70s, it might be
We
one of
would
the
have
most,
been massive.
the
This
most
brand
famous
would have been
distillery in
massive.
Scotland, but it was just, almost before its time in a few ways.
Absolutely. And well, the good thing for us is that we still have some liquid from that time, from the 60s, from the 70s, mainly from the 70s. And every now and then we see some rare and old, beautiful bottles coming out. We will see some of these bottles coming to Australia. Actually, we have some 50-year. I asked the brand managers to send me some information that didn't get to me on time tonight because I wanted to share maybe a little bit more. But we do have some rare and old whiskies coming to Australia. I think that's pretty much what I can share at this stage. Which will be very good. And
We have tried some stuff from the 70s and the early 80s.
yes,
Yeah,
we
which is
have.
pretty special. But obviously the new world of, I mean, I would love to, but unfortunately I can't afford to drink 70s and 80s liquid every time. So
Oh, we might have something going on at Oak Barrel.
Yeah,
We
maybe.
always find a way to open one of these bottles over here and get some people along to try the liquid.
yeah, but this is the problem. Without being able to invite 40 other people to hang out with me, I can't justify opening these bottles for myself.
Unless we know we can always like ship in some tastings.
Yeah,
We can- we
there's
can
an
make
idea
it
there.
work. We can
There's
make
an
it
idea
work.
there. But obviously and how I got into Glenglassaugh and sort of everyone's introduction to Glenglassaugh is whiskey's like the one we're trying to today. So, I mean, for me, Glenglassaugh always has a lot of fruit. It's a big spirit, but when I say big, I don't mean big peat or big worm tub sulphur or anything like that, but just big and muscular and fruity at the same time.
Well, I think we have a very unique fermentation process. So Glenglassaugh, as you know, it was closed for a long period of time. So in order to pack all of this flavor on a non-age statement, they really put some thought into our fermentation and the way we go about it. And I add that all of our fermenters, all of that room, everything is quite old. So we still have a lot of bacteria in that room. So we have a very long fermentation process, and it really gets to a point that our fermentation gets ignited again by this bacterial process, right, that we have in the room. So we have almost like 2 fermentations in the course of a fermentation, and adds so much it packs so much flavor in our new mix spirit before it even goes into the barrel. So it's quite, like I said, there is a very interesting funk about Glenglassaugh. Actually, I would say that every single whiskey in our portfolio, it's a little bit of a unicorn. I don't think they do things in a very traditional way. They all a little bit weird for a reason, and Glenglassaugh was definitely, I would say, the most weird one. The poor kid on the corner that nobody understands sometimes.
I think it's more like the youngest child. So I'm the oldest of four.
That is so true.
So I'm the experiment. I get the harshest bedtimes. I've got the least pocket money. By the time you get to kid 4, you're like, she'll be right. She can stay up forever. She can go
I
play.
love this way of explaining.
Go play in the dirty puddles. She'll be right. Which I think that's quite good for Glenglassaugh because it gets away by jumping on what the others have done before it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they got to be a little bit more experimental across all of these processes. And although we're having evolution here, the first bottle that came to life in 2000 and I don't want to lie, is it 2007, 8, 9, 10? I'm not going to say right now. I think it's 2010. I'll cross check on Google.
It was recommissioned in 08, I think, and then 09
around 10-ish, then 11.
Yeah.
Right, so let's imagine across that time. So anyway, when we brought back to life, the first bottling was the Revival, which we don't have here. And the Revival is already quite interesting, right? So imagine that you get whiskey aging into ex-wine barrels, ex-bourbon barrels, then you vet this together, and then you go into a second maturation, which is then ex-sherry barrels. Which is quite intriguing. All of this with this funky, interesting way of fermenting. On top of the fact that I think we always discuss cuts here. I shared a little bit about Benriach and Glendronach. Glenglassaugh will be a different spectrum from these two. We really have early cuts.
Yeah, okay.
So I think Glendronach we have late cuts. Benriach we have broad cuts. Glenglassaugh we really work with early first and second cut as well, that very first portion that works quite well with this ex-bourbon, with this vanilla notes. Reason why I think evolution is so absolutely brilliant. So all of those little details and all of these barrels, I think they did something quite unique and almost ahead of their time, considering the way whiskey was, all the proposals around whiskey at that time. Anyway.
Yeah, so while Benriach has a big heart, as we discovered 2 weeks ago, this is very young at heart, a very youthful heart.
Journalists, journalists.
I can come up with, I can talk shit. A quick g'day to Mark Westmoreland, who is from the Wolfburn Distillery, who is... I think it's a little bit early where he is at the moment, probably about 10 a.m. in Scotland, up in Thurso where he's based. So
good morning.
Hopefully he's having a dram with us at the same time. Just listen to us talk rubbish about whiskey. But I'm interested from a brand point of view. Glendronach, because obviously you've got Glendronach, Benriach and Glenglassaugh in the single malt portfolio. Glendronach has those big sherry casks. It's driven. People don't understand what they're going to get. Benriach can be a little bit all over the place. It can be anything it wants to be, basically. Glenglassaugh is a little bit the same in the fact that you have peated runs, you have, sherry cask, bourbon cask, virgin oak, port cask, all these sorts of things. Where does it fit in for you? Like, do you find it the best, opportunity to say, Scott, now's the time you should be drinking Glenglassaugh? How do you approach people?
No, but I think the fact that we always bring the conversation to the fact that we are a coastal distillery.
Yeah.
But I think what you said is very fair. This is because I think we have to define brands. We have because otherwise people they cannot quite grasp what that distillery is all about. So even though you believe, and this happens, right? Like when you bring a brand to life, and our friends from other distilleries will be able to confirm this. You need to choose which stores you want to work with, right? Yeah. We have another distillery, Lane, where we had the issue of having too many stores. So, okay, which store? Is this about music? Is this about the barrels? Is it about the heritage? Is it about the castle? What is it that we're going to talk about? And then you really have to understand what's going to work best and work with these stores. And I think Glenglassaugh was one that I find very, although of course it's all about coastal, we're still a highland distillery, but if you think about it, that location is sort of highland, but then coastal and so close to Speyside. So what is it really? I try not to define it too much. but we do have these stories that help us, of course, to shape what Glenglassaugh is. But it's such a funky story. It's such an interesting journey to get to here. And as you said, yeah, I just described revival. And then right in front of us here, we have evolution, which is 100% ex-Tennessee barrels. And then it's completely different altogether, because why revival has such an interesting flavor profile from all these barrels. This guy over here is a fruit salad. It's pineapple and it's banana, and all of this topped with some vanilla caramel. I think it's even hard to say that they both come from the same distillery, isn't it? So how do you put all of this into one single story?
Yeah, I guess, and that's a really good point. I think as Seamus, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, but drinking a dram at the beach is always fun. So that's always a plus for a coastal distillery. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Or even if you're at a distillery, you'd just be at a beach, and that's always good fun. But yeah, it's an interesting one for a distillery that is so young, relatively speaking, in its comeback, in its revival, its evolution, so to speak. How do you do that, or is that the message? Is that a little bit like Ben Riach, this could be anything, don't put it into a pigeonhole? Yeah,
look, I feel like you got to be really open-minded. I think I had a bottle of our PX. I think I had some left over or something. That was the previous one in my decanter. So I had some of my Glenglassaugh PX in there. And it's again so different. So yeah, it's not like Glendronach, that you know exactly what to expect. Of course, every now and then we bring something new. But if you drink most Glendronach expressions anywhere in the world, at any time of the day or night, regardless of what you're eating or drinking, what you're doing, what you're thinking about, you can recognize it. It's just right there. You drink it up. So it's Glendronach, and then some whiskeys are pretty much like that. Glenglassaugh, it's harder. I think it's a bit harder to do that. And I don't think that's a bad thing, actually. I think it's quite brilliant. And I think the fact that it's quite young, as you said, I think this is still being defined, I think the personality and I think we're still in a process, because 2007, it's not really that much time. We're finally bringing age statements, like a core range age statement. The brand is still shaping up to be something amazing. And at the moment, it's coastal and it's highland and it's salty and uses all of these barrels. And now with Rachel Berry, the queen, we have like whiskeys that they pass through 5 different barrels, because that's what she does so brilliantly well. So imagine where we could be in 20 years, right? Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things for me that even before I tried some of the whiskies, the new whiskies from Glenglassaugh, that sort of was just a mark of, yes, this is a good idea, is 50% alcohol.
You good?
A little bit more, please. I'll always take a little bit more. Thank you, Thalita. Because, I love young whiskies. I love to see that DNA, whether that's really, really young, like new make era, when it's before it's even looking like it goes in the bottle. But then even young whiskies that show a lot of that malt and spirit character, when you can bottle that at 46 or 50% alcohol, that for me goes, okay, here's a company, here's a distillery that is backing themselves. Not only are we going to do an American oak cask release that shows, the spirit in its pretty much natural habitat.
There is no way to hide. You cannot hide it. I think I'm going to bring up a MasterChef again, right? It's one of those dishes. Yeah. There's nowhere to hide. If it's not good, that's it. It's just not going to be good. And it's 50% ABV, all ex-bourbon barrels. So you do get that new make profile, doesn't it? It's really there.
Yeah, maybe not to say new make, but it's you can get the spirit character. Because I think sometimes when people hear the word new make, they go, oh, it's too young, it's going to be hot, it's going to be whatever. Which I know when we talk about it, we know that that's not what we mean.
Absolutely,
but certainly spirit character, which I think is really important, because sometimes spirit character can be lost. And not to have a go at places like Glendronach, where a lot of the times, particularly when you get into really old, it's all about finding a great cask. But I like to step out of that a lot of the time and go, let's try something that actually tastes like whiskey.
Yeah,
which is what this does.
Yeah, I think of that the Glendronach cask collection. I'm in no way talking anything bad about the 26 or the 28s. They were absolutely brilliant. But that 13 years old PX, that 13 was absolutely brilliant. I think it's one of the most balanced Glendronachs I ever. I don't want to even use the word balance because again it might be misinterpreted. But it was just so well. It was so bloody delicious that I wish we could just release that and have it every year forever.
Yeah, that was the quickest to sell out. So if you could find more of that, I'll happily take them. But
no, I had some samples, but they had an accident.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously the world is a very interesting place at the moment. We don't know, with bottling lines and all distilleries, winding down a little bit, might be running up, that sort of thing. Taking 2020 out of the picture, we have sort of...
This is crazy, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah.
It's almost August. I'm still shocked. I only realized, I was telling him that I realized today that we're almost in August. I was finishing the plans for the year, but wait a minute, the year is gone.
Yeah.
So I'm planning the year sort of, it's just interesting.
Yeah, so taking that out of pretending that 2020 never happened, we've obviously got Evolution, Revival, and Torfa, which is the peated, and they're sort of the three core ranges then with like octaves and semi-limited editions. Was that the plan to keep these going moving forward? Those three will stay?
Look, of course I cannot guarantee that this is the plan because right now at the distillery at 10 a.m. they might be having a dram and a whole different conversation. But at this stage, as far as I know here in Australia, the plan is to keep these three expressions going, even though we're also planning bringing new expressions in, some core range that have some age statement to it. Anything really could happen. It's also hard to know when things will happen right now when it comes to new expressions because of course supply chain, etc., like travel, retail, everything is quite complicated at the moment. So I'm pretty sure that just like we are adjusting plans here at a state level in another country, our global teams are definitely discussing bigger problems. Yeah,
and it is. I did preface that by saying like if 2020 didn't happen, but 2020 did happen, so it could go anywhere and things. So yes, we're talking here live on Facebook and on Instagram with Thalita Alves, brand ambassador for a number of whiskey brands, but specifically Glenglassaugh today. Now, when I put up did a little bit of an Instagram story on the Oak Barrel page today, just to sort of announce that this was going ahead, and I was looking through some of the photos, which we sort of mentioned beforehand, that the very, very talented and lovely May Lawrence took of one of the events that we did out here. And I was going to put three photos of like in a bit of a tessellation thing of labels, very pretty bottles laying down, all that sort of thing. But there was one I couldn't go past, which is a famous photo of you with just I think it's the 86, or it's one of the old and rare casks. Your face is just full of joy when you were opening that. And I've never been able to get a photo, or May hasn't, at any of the other tastings that you've run with us. So I mean, that was just a really famous photo. And I just thought, like, that just sort of sums up not just Glenglassaugh, but, whiskey in general. The
feeling that you have. I think there was something quite magical. I have a hard time collecting bottles. And I know that whiskey is not meant to be collected, but there are some bottles that you want to keep for later. But I have the intention of doing so. Sometimes I have some incredible bottles that they get to you, and I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to open. And this is until, like, it's midnight and I had maybe a couple of drinks and I'm like, let's just open now. And it's amazing. And that feeling when you first open it, that sound. You see, there is something about it. And the first time you pour has a very different sound, doesn't it? It's like click, 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 click.
As
click,
the air
click.
rushes into the bottle.
Just like wine, isn't it? But better.
Much better than wine. Nothing wrong with wine. We still need your barrels, so please keep making wine and fortified wine for us. But I think, it's either a very lucky distillery or it was ahead of its time, or whichever the way you want to put Glenglassaugh. But I think if you wrote a book you could pick any distillery in Scotland and it would have quite a fascinating history. I think the Glenglassaugh story is one that hasn't really been told like, there's people who've written books on Lefroy. You can get books on Brora and Port Ellen that will go into what happened on this day in 1927 on the site as Jock, walked his dog past it. I think there's sort of Glenglassaugh is one of the few distilleries that you could go into that much detail, like through those war years, those prohibition years when it's rebuilt and closed and opened and all that sort of stuff. But I think it puts it in quite an interesting point because, you know, that enjoyment that you sort of saw in 86 from that 86 cask, which is getting right to the end of its previous life, those casks are finite and they don't exist. And you've hinted just before that there might be some of them, some old stuff.
Yeah, we might have.
And I think that builds that excitement a little bit sometimes because it was like, this is, you know, we're doing this and we did that with 40 mates of some of our very good friends and all of a sudden some very new good friends in that room.
It's spirit from that time.
Yeah.
Imagine that we maybe, and of course, hopefully these expressions will get to Australia. So I hope I'm not making some empty promises here because at this stage, the intention is to have them here. So we'll see. But we're going to be tasting whiskey that was made in times that, I don't know, the whole history of that distillery was kind of a bit uncertain. They were not quite sure where they were going with it. They were considering to close it. And yet, some of the most incredible whiskeys we saw coming out from Glenglassaugh to date, they were from like the 70s, kind of like end of 70s, beginning of 80s. Of course, we still have great whiskey today, but we have some great whiskeys that won some pretty amazing prizes from that time. And it tells a story through flavor. You can actually taste what was going on at that distillery, how they were probably going about their processes, which barrels, the fermentation, why. It's beautiful. It's I find whiskey very poetic in so many ways.
A quick g'day to Thalita Alves, who shares a last name.
That's
You
my
might
sister.
might know that. But this actually, I just sort of this came up on the top of my head, but Seamus has just pointed out there is actually a book on the history of Glenglassaugh, which, looking at that link, was written by an Ian Buxton, who's a very famous and very...
And we have 2 copies in Australia, so if you want to have a look...
Where are they? Do you have one?
Yeah, I do have one.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
Seamus has the other one.
Well, that's an Amazon link. I might just have to go buy one. But yeah, so because
if
I
you
reckon that
want
would
it,
be
yeah.
fascinating. But I think, you know, it's a distillery that you get to a certain point, like 0809, and that's it. And then you have to make the jump because there is no 90s. It just physically doesn't exist. So I think that's quite special. But I also think, and I'm not going to sit here and say, you know, a lot of whiskey that is 30, 40, 50 years old is pretty good. Like there's no,
Absolutely, yeah.
but I think Glenglassaugh fits into distilleries like, you know, Glenkeith that we don't see a lot of that makes really exceptional old whiskey, almost by accident because the casks have been sitting around. And that, like, from a consumer's point of view and from my point of view, relatively, you know, decent price for what's in the bottle because if that had another distillery's name on it, you'd be paying 4, 5, 10 times as much.
Yeah, and it can get to that. Look, the book is very interesting. Glenglassaugh, I think you mentioned, I think the distillery is really involved with the history of that area of Scotland. So when you go into it, when you go into James Moir, which is our founder, he was he was quite a political, how do I say politically? Sorry, English. He was very active, so he was quite involved with imports, exports. He really brought a lot of different things to life in Port Soy. Yeah, so the city was still growing and a lot to do with this man. So when he decided to actually start a distillery, he had a very big, of course, he had big support from the actual community because he was generating income. He was so when you read about Glenglassaugh, you're going to be reading about it's actually a little gem. You know, you're going to have a look history of a whole area, of a whole community of people of Second World War when they were actually using our malting floors as a bakery. So there's so many interesting stories that are not just related to the whiskey, but to the people, and it's just like a little window of time that gives you some insights of I don't know, the history of the humanity, really.
Yeah, and you know that's part of the reason why I love whiskey, but also spirits, is that the whiskey we drink today is, you know, shaped and defined by socio-economic and political machinations from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, and then within what was happening in that town, you know, shapes what is in a Glenglassaugh bottle today. And I think, you know, to, you know, risk getting a little bit emotional about it, but whiskey is drinking liquid history. Whether it's, you know, 5 years old or 500 years old, it is It is very much that. And g'day to Whisky is my jam as well on the Facebook. They're good to have you there. And yes, so Jeff comments on keen to try the 2009 10-year-old, which was bottled for I believe the Whisky show, sort of before it all, the virtual Whisky show before it all went. A little
bit before. So I did try that whiskey, and who said that? Jeff. Jeff is pretty delicious. I think Seamus might still have some with him because I think I had this bottle with me for some time.
Yeah,
it's no longer with me.
I think it's another one of those bottles, that very special bottle of whiskey, because it's a 10-year-old Glenglassaugh and there's not a lot of them around. But it was brought over with the idea that we're going to have all these big whiskey events at the end of the year. You and I
Tell me about it.
Yeah, you and I might.
All these launches, all these ideas, and
you and I might know about another bottle that's on a boat at the moment that we might need to come up with some new ideas about how to get it out there, since Whisky Fair's not happening this year. But we'll
find ways.
There's a hint that I haven't told publicly yet, but we'll get to that in a couple of weeks. But it's quite funny. I know there's some other friends of mine who have bottles of whiskey, single casks with certain events written on the label that didn't happen this year. So it's like.
So you're still fine then?
Yeah. So
is it event on the bottle?
I don't think so.
You're good then.
But I'm almost going. I should have put.
It kind of makes it special.
It would have been a collector's edition, but maybe missed a beat there. But that's all right.
2020.
But I think, and that's really it's a cool thing. I mean, 5 years ago, and not like 10 years ago, but even 5 years ago, the access in Australia to single casks. As a whiskey drinking community was quite limited, let alone exclusives to Australia and exclusives to certain bars and bottle stores and shows and fairs and all that sort of thing. So I think we know we're living through a golden age of whiskey. We have been for the last decade or so, but I think we're actually at a golden age of access to really unique stuff that is of the Australian palate. If that makes sense, stuff.
Yeah, it does.
Bottled whiskies chosen by Australians for Australians, which I think is quite something we haven't really seen before. Unless we go back to Gillies era.
It started. I would say, it became. It's becoming a little, and it's still not common, but a little more common in the past 3 years or so.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that it's happening, and it's good to see the way people are embracing whiskey in Australia, and not just Scotch. We're talking whiskey. Which it also makes me very happy. It's not about bourbon, rye, single malt, Canadian. It's about trying good whiskey and be really open-minded across all of these different expressions. Because that's of course I have big love for Scotch, but I have big love for whiskey.
Yeah.
I love trying different things, and it doesn't. Sometimes it's not about where it comes from. It's about how it was produced, right? I think you mentioned before that whiskey is a liquid history, and it's history because, of course, it tells you a little. It gives you the insights of that little piece of time, but it also history of someone's intention, maybe a group of people, someone's idea, maybe more than one person, and it's to do with what they were driven and passionate about it, and they believed that project enough. Because come on. So actually bottle the whiskey, it doesn't take you less than 6-7 years. Very rarely people actually age for exactly 3 years in bottles. So 6-7 years minimum. So you gotta really believe a project. You gotta really, there is emotion involved, I'm reading about stocks now and people tell me, no, you should never have emotion involved in your decision process. But how can you not have emotion when, it's a piece of what you believe?
Yeah.
And you believe it's going to work, and you're going to wait 7 years, and you have to. It's such a game of chance, So I find that quite brilliant as well. So every time I'm trying whiskey, regardless of where it's from, I have such big respect for the producer, and sometimes might not be for my palate, but I still take the time to understand why they did it that way. What is it that what was the intention? What does the barrel or the process tells me? What the bottle, the label? Some people just say, this label is ugly. I don't like the color. Don't even think don't even take 2 seconds to look at it and understand why they did it or whatever, So I think with a little bit of respect at that moment, I think is so essential. for you to have a good experience and learn how to appreciate regardless of you liking or disliking it.
Yeah. So, moral of the lesson is be ruthless without emotion. When you're buying stocks or at the poker table or wherever you are, bottle all that emotion up and bring it to a different type of bottle.
Every time.
Into whiskey. Quick g'day to Colmar Estate on the Instagram there, who make fantastic Pinot Noir and Chardonnay out in Orange, one of my favourite Pinot Noir producers in the country. Also a very good Riesling, but I will always lean towards their Chardonnay before that. But
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. There's some out there I'll point it out to you. But yeah, I think it's right. Like it is. Yeah, and sometimes I think with all whiskey, we need to take that step back. Even if it was 3 years old, like minimum Scotch, even if it's 2 years old, minimum Australian whiskey, and this is, more relevant than ever before. And I've made this joke or made this saying ever since I've been talking about whiskey to people is, what were you doing 10 years ago? Like, that was a very different world when this 10-year-old was bottled. If it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, like the bare minimum, this is older than that, double and a bit. But you could say, what were you doing 8 months ago? And the world is a different place at the moment. And they're just time capsules of these beautiful
time capsule
things that.
Oh, I was trying to find a way to explain this hint of time in bloody second language. Time capsule.
When we do go live in Brazil, I'm going to be in all sorts of trouble. I won't be able to pronounce anything. Yeah, you'll wipe the floor with me. But yeah, and I think that's great. And I think often we can just sort of get almost like the chip on the shoulder. We do tall poppy very well in this country. Oh, it's only 10 years old, that's not particularly old. I was like, yes, it bloody is. 10 years is a long time. 5 years is a long time. 3 years.
As I said, like eight months ago, the world's a whole different place.
Yeah.
And of course, I think this year, it's going so quick that I don't know how you're feeling. But I definitely had a second this year that 5 years didn't feel like a lot, only because right now time is going so fast. We're like losing that reference of time because of everything that's going on. But all right, 5 years ago, and think where I was in life, where I am now. I was still like fighting for, even to stay in this country. Really, I was still like working out my visa.
We're glad you did.
It was such a different time, and so much has happened. Like I was thinking, like the progression where I was. I lived in 3 different places, and I'm talking about different states and different cities. So it's. Yeah, imagine these guys. Like we're talking about this 50-year-old Glenglassaugh coming to shore. Well, whoever started that whiskey, it's probably not here anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Just how crazy is that? Or the 2 years old, as you said. Who knows? Like the first person that actually added that liquid into the barrel might be somewhere else. Maybe doing something. It's
but you can go further back than that as well, because you have the farmer who grew the barley. The year before it was distilled. You have the cooper who made the barrel maybe 10 years before, and then in America or in Spain or wherever that was. And so you can just go really down the rabbit hole, that thread of things. But
so many hands
coming
together.
But I think it's going to be really fascinating, and we won't get to see this for a few years, but is to see 2020 vintages because particularly in Scotland, distilleries are, slowing down production. Some of them closed for periods, some of them just slowed down. A lot of them have kept producing. They've closed cellar doors and that sort of thing. But I think there's going to be no one is ever who's alive now is going to be like, forget 2020. Like, we're going to laugh when we're sitting next to people in 2019 at bars going, you were born in, not 2019, in 2039. Going,
yes.
You were born in 2021, like, you don't even know what it was like beforehand. I was like, you sure you're old enough to drink? And that's when we're going to be grabbing these like 2020 vintages. And we talk about time capsules, and
I really hope so.
Yeah.
I really hope we're there. I really hope we're running tastings.
Yeah.
And opening this single cask collection 2020.
Yeah, and it's going to be like, no one's going to forget where you were in 2020, and I just think that that's something that we can look forward to. Loreni Distilling, here's a very good example. We've just jumped in on the Instagram. They're down in Tasmania. Their first whiskey was, I feel, I'm not going to speak for them, but I still think is due in August or September this year. Like, they're going to launch a whiskey in 2020, and so that's going to be. They've done gin and lots of other stuff, but their whiskey release is going to be 2020, and so I think that's going to be quite fascinating.
Some stories.
Yeah.
Some stories to tell.
I think good comment here from Matt Bailey that sort of sums up what we were sort of talking about just there is young whiskey is bloody great when it works. We need to move away from the 90s marketing of 12 years minimum, which I 100% agree with. And it was a great idea at the time, at the end of the 80s, and I think what we mothballed in 86 in Glenglassaugh, no one was drinking whiskey. We needed to reinvent single malt regions. How can we demystify whiskey and get people excited again? It's worked. It's brilliant. Age statements, regions, but we've sort of, it's like we've done that.
It's about good whiskey, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's about enjoyment. It's about good liquid.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. Now we need to sort of start talking about that more so than age statements where, I have had, 15-year-olds that aren't as good as the 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds that are much better than 30-year-olds. My whiskey of the year last year was the Glendronach 15, which, and I'd always preferred the Glendronach 12. This is the first year I prefer the 15 to the 12. And I think they're both better than the 18, but that's all right. People disagree with me on that one. The running wino says COVID vintage. I think yes, and judging by that Instagram handle, I think wino means you're probably going to see the 2020 vintage because in wine it'll come out next year. In fact, we already have some 2020 vintages from Angus Vinden and some certain wineries in store. In whiskey, and we'll probably have to wait a few more years before we see that. Well, not probably, we will. But also a quick g'day to Wine Saver as well, who's waving at us there. But I think, yeah. So, yes, and whiskey's my jam. Hillwood was another Tasmanian distillery. Like, all of this stuff is, arriving now and that sort of thing. I don't think there's going to be too many Australian distilleries that start, like, building and their first productions in 2020. But yeah.
I feel like if you're about to start a new business model, you would potentially wait. Like it depends about. It depends if you're like how many investors you have behind you. You might have to wait a few months there, which is absolutely fair enough, isn't it?
But I think obviously I'm about 60 years old and you're about 21. But so in 20 years time, you're going to be able to see other people from across the bar or wherever you are and have like a 2020 vintage, and you'll just nod to each other and be like, yeah, I was there, you were there.
I know, you know,
we were there.
We know.
Particularly in a bar in Melbourne, you go, yeah, we all know what went on there. And there'll be these 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds who are completely oblivious to the whole thing.
Now we know how our grandparents feel.
Yeah. Well, I remember...
It's true. I imagine if we're here like for Second World War, and when you look at us and like, you know nothing. Okay, fair, right?
It actually happened last year, and I remember... and again, we're going down, as we normally do, we're going down side tracks.
Yeah, Glenglassaugh.
Yeah,
but anyway, we'll go back there.
Very, very quickly.
Let's talk about the war first.
I was sitting at Old Mate's place on September the 12th last year, which is 2019.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there by myself and just sort of having a couple of drinks, and I realised that
the date,
someone next to me,
10 years,
someone could be sitting next to me who was legally allowed to drink, who was not alive when September 11 happened. Which is probably the most, from a Western society point of view, when the world changed pretty quickly. And obviously it's changed again in 2020. So I think like that moment will happen again in 18 years' time when it's going to be like, oh, okay, well, you weren't there then. But yeah, anyway. that's whiskey, and whiskey brings out these emotions in people. That's what happens.
And it's okay when it's whiskey. Not okay when you're actually investing money with stock market.
Yeah. Yeah. But don't invest in whiskey. Well, I mean, you can buy whiskey, but drink it. It's better value when you drink it.
Absolutely, I agree, 100%. Because nothing replaces that. See, that's worth $500.
I was going to say, why are you doing that?
Sorry,
that's fine. I'm getting excited and drinking quicker.
I drive every time I leave my car here.
Evolution 50%. Now, we're talking about a sub $100 bottle as well, retail on the shelf, which is very, very attractive. Revival's 46%, I think. Yeah,
50% here for Evolution and for our Torfa as well.
Yeah. So just on Torfa, that's peated. How much is was that an experiment or it's ongoing?
I don't know if you're gonna ask me about the ppm because I get this a lot. All right, because I look. It doesn't matter what people tell you. It doesn't matter. Anyone in Australia, anyone this is it does not matter what anyone tells you. They're all probably lying.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, Our ppms are now very well defined, but our ppms from a while back, it's relative.
Yeah.
Right? Like imagine that, yes, we definitely had some experimentations. Could be anywhere between 30 and 50. Meaning, well, saying nothing really, right? So,
But, ppm, phenolics parts per million, was a pretty broad terminology to say, okay, X distillery heats their barley to 30 ppm, old mates down the road do it to 20 ppm, and so that's different. But in many, many cases, the 20 could, be more smoky or more peaty than the 30. So I don't really
it's all about the process. Of course, the way you're going to ferment, distill, the type of barrel you're going to age in, how the amount of time you're going to age for, how new that barrel was. All of that will also affect the ppm. And it's not like you measure at the end. You measure this is all through the barley in the beginning. So I never really discussed the ppm of it. It's quite smoky and it's delicious.
So that wasn't going to be the question I was going to ask you, but thank you for asking that question regardless.
Emotions.
But like, how much of like the annual production is peated? Is it like a really small amount?
It's pretty small. Actually, production in general at Glenglassaugh, it's not really huge compared to our big friends out there, especially when it comes to Glens. And when it comes, of course, to our peated expressions, it's even smaller because we tend to produce that once every year. As you know, once we do the whole process, we actually have to clean the stills. So it tends to be like at the end of the year prior any cleaning processes. So not that big. I don't have exact volumes right now, so I'm not going to say it. Otherwise, I'll be also lying. What I can tell you is that Torfa, of course, you see a lot of ex-bourbon barrels in it. It makes sense. It tastes delicious. You have a touch of sherry in there. And what I really like about it is that, again, we only work with peat that we collect from the mainland. So we don't really have any Isla peat. So all of the delicious iodine that, by the way, I also adore. So every time I compare, I'm in no way saying that one is better or worse. But all of that iodine that will create that medicinal profile is not present in the peat we use. So our whiskeys have more of a sweet smoke, let's say, something more like barbecue with friends, having some bacon glazed with some maple syrup. That's the vibe of our smoke, as opposed as that delicious medicinal oysters. They both work. I have space for both of them in my heart. I'm just explaining the difference.
This isn't a story with Torfa, but when you said the barbecue, reminded me of Benriach Curiositas, the Peter Torfa, which for me is honey smoked ham and glazed things. And I remember before I was working here with my predecessor, Dave Withers, was here, who's now head distiller at Archie Rose. I came in, would have been about 6 or 7 years ago, and said, hey, I'm going to a barbecue with mates. What whiskey should I take? And he sort of gave me Curiositas and went down a hoot. Like, we finished the bottle that afternoon. We played poker and I won. So I have never lost a game of poker while drinking Benriach Curiositas. So
that's what I needed.
Yes.
All right.
I haven't tried it with Torfa yet, but that's going to be my next one. And if I lose, I'm going to go straight back to Curiositas. But you just remember that
player.
memory.
Oh, we need to do poker night.
Yeah, we can do poker night.
Yeah.
Well, I've done some virtual poker nights actually with friends during the lockdown period.
I can arrange the Benriach.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I reckon it'd be cool. But I kind of want to try Torfa to see if I have the same luck. And maybe because we're talking in my previous life, so everyone I was playing with may not have been, as big a whiskey drinkies as I was. So maybe their cards got a little bit looser and they were a little bit. So maybe that was what it was down. If I play with proper whiskey drinkers, I could be in a little bit of trouble.
Well, we'll see. We will soon find out.
Yeah. Beautiful. Now, I am a little bit mindful of time because Instagram only allows you to go for an hour. So in the next 5 minutes or so, we're probably going to be kicked off because I think it was about this time that we went live. Normally I write it down, but I forgot to today, so that's all right. But before we get kicked off on all things, I think it's a really exciting time for brands like Glenglassaugh. I think we've spoken about this a lot, and at the risk of nailing home a high school debating team line, is that these distilleries that aren't squared in or pigeonholed into what they are meant to be, particularly for official bottlings. Independent bottlings is a whole different thing. 2021 beyond is about discovery. I think people are going to want to take a punt on things. If everyone wants brand XYZ, there's only a finite amount of that goes through the roof. It becomes expensive because everyone wants it. There's a real chance that these distilleries are going to be people's go-to. I mean, it's the stuff that I love drinking at the moment. So I think it's exciting. I mean, are you seeing in Australia growth in brands like Glenglassaugh?
Absolutely. Look, talking brand growth very specifically, we're hitting all of our targets, and going above that. So
yeah, cool.
yes, we are more than we actually predicted. But that's not just for the Scotches though. We have a few brands. I think whiskey in general, it's being definitely embraced, and it's something that of course makes me very happy. I would say that when you see also the whiskey boom, like all the whiskey distilleries boom in Australia, it tells you a lot as well. And I think that's good. I think there is space for everybody. There's space for the bigger brands, the medium brands, the newer brands. I think 12 years old, heavily marketed are fine. The non-age statements are fine. And I think, again, it's all about embracing the industry and trying out what's out there and being really open-minded and try to understand what is it that distiller, that producer was, what is it that they were trying to bottle for you? What is this story that they were trying to tell through flavor? And I think for me that's whiskey is pretty much that. It's about the experience.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, it's a slightly different thing, but talking about gin, I had a few conversations about gin with a few brands today, and a lot of some of the top ends of town, like your big companies, are going, "Oh, gin sort of plateaued. The sales aren't going anywhere." And maybe as a whole industry, that's
like
correct.
distillery shares are going up. Sorry. Woo.
Yeah, we Whiskey by Jam having a bit
I'm
of
all about shares nowadays. You'll see me in 3 months.
Yeah.
Either happy or broke.
Well, if you're happy, I'm going to follow you around to the bars because you'll be able to buy the good stuff. But what we see within, so maybe gin as a category is not growing or is growing as quickly, but within that, people are drinking more boutique, more small batch, the stuff that we're interested in, that's still growing. And I still think the same with whiskey. The category is still growing, but also we're growing the good stuff. We're converting people who have been buying $30 or $40 bottles of whiskey, the ones that are on specials, the loss leaders where no one's making any money apart from the government tax agency, into stuff that is 50, 60, 70, then maybe 100, then maybe 120, and you may drink 3 bottles of $30 whiskey at the same time you drink 120. Mm-hmm. That's great. Drink less, drink better.
Drink less, drink better,
Enjoy
and drink different things, right? I think that's and that's so good. I feel like people are getting more open-minded to try new flavors and keep, just keep it experimental. I think that's definitely very good.
Yeah, and to sort of tie that in and wrap this up with a nice little bow on top, is in Glenglassaugh you can do that within the brand because there's so many different flavors. You could have a full collection just of Glenglassaugh, nothing else.
Age statement, very old, it's everything.
And some really old stuff, and unfortunately I can't. And this is, I think, the next time, in 20 years when we're doing this again. Not that we won't do it in between then, but we'll be able to do smell-o-vision, so we can actually push the smells and aromas of these whiskies through there.
Oh, that'll be awesome.
But we can't do that right now. So what we're going to do is...
to cuddle each other.
Yeah. This is excellent, but some of the late 70s and sort of early to mid-60s stuff from Glenglassaugh that I've been very, very privileged to try is unbelievable. Perfumed and fragrant, but still carrying that fruit. And I think it's part of that spirit character that was almost a bit too much and a bit awkward for blenders to work with, 50, 60 years ago, is what makes it so great now. 30, 40 years ago, forgotten about in the back of the warehouse. So, you've probably tried a little bit more of that stuff than I have.
Yeah, I did try a couple of a couple of interesting whiskeys.
Yeah. But yeah, any final thoughts? That was sort of my final thought. Is excellent. Glenglassaugh was bloody excellent.
I think you nailed it. I just appreciate everybody joining us and just taking the time to understand Glenglassaugh a little bit better. Have a look on our website, and as Seamus mentioned as well, we have a book out there. But at the end of the day, it's really about getting some liquid to you and trying it. I think it tells everything you need to know. It is a fairly decent rum, and it has enough there to keep you intrigued.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. We're ending up now. It's I think it's telling me, or it's getting close. But anyway, thank you, Thalita. Thank you for dropping by and hanging around the barrel.
Thank you for having us.
We've now done.
I started doing that.
Yeah, we've done Glendronach, Benriach, Glenglassaugh now. So I've got a couple of ideas of what we can do next when we want to talk about it. Maybe we go away from, we've got Slane and some other whiskies in the portfolio, which I do love. Slane as a whiskey, but also a whiskey that you can play with. And I do like, Mum told me never play with your food. I'm telling you right now, play with your whiskies. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We definitely have a couple of those in the portfolio that we can bring over.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Jeff sums it up quite well on the Facebook. Just enjoy, and Nico Devlin says cheers, which we can agree with. Thank you everyone for talking rubbish with us and commenting and having a bit of fun. We will see you at some point in the future with some element of things that we're going to do. And we will be back in next week, couple of weeks, when we can figure out what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, a couple of weeks. No, we definitely have more whiskey.
Yeah, there's always whiskey. That's the great thing. There's always another bottle. All right, thanks everyone, and we will speak to you soon.